And I've been involved in a lot of this controversy recently around Iran, because I have no reluctance to bring critique to bear on the repressive regime in Iran. And that doesn't, people say, oh, you must be in love with Mossad. No, quit lying. Oh, you must be tied to the State Department talking heads. Quit lying. I'm concerned about working and poor people dealing with repression and dealing with domination wherever they are. I'm against the immoral war and the illegal war that the U.S. imperial entity engaged in with the invasion and so forth. You see, I'm against, of course, the genocide in Gaza and so forth. I acknowledge the degree to which the repressive regime in Iran was willing to provide support for the Palestinian resistance. I understand that. The Soviet Union did the same thing for Mandela, and we had talks with Mandela. And I still had critiques of domination and repression within the Soviet Union. It could be Jews in the Soviet Union. It could be workers in the Soviet Union. It could be dissenting voices in the Soviet Union. I'm in solidarity with those folk critiquing Soviet domination, and I support the Soviet Union providing resources to support the struggle against apartheid. And so we just had to be morally consistent in some sense, and it's very, very difficult to do that because you're going to get trashed and vilified in a number of different ways. But I mean, I'm used to that. But I do think that issues of character is very important. It really is. There are such things as right-wing gangsters who rule and left-wing gangsters who oppose that rule, but still treat their own folk in very repressive ways. We have to be able to point that out and still acknowledge that we got our eye on class struggle, we got our eye on imperial policy, and we got our eye on the magnificent humanity of poor people and working people wherever they are.
The key, though, right, is that the oppressive systems of other regimes are not going to be fixed by the oppressive system of American empire.
That's right. Exactly right. Oh, you 120% right on that. Absolutely. Right. That's exactly right.
I don't think this should come as any surprise, because we wouldn't have expected anything less from Wasserman Schultz. But I assume that you probably have a pretty strong opinion about what she's doing right now, running in a predominantly people of color district in South Florida. And again, this isn't just any district. This is a very working class district that has suffered mightily under her congressional rule, even though she hasn't represented these communities directly. But her policies and influence on Capitol Hill cannot be denied. It goes without saying that I think too much of the country doesn't understand how serious of an issue it is when somebody, when people say, oh, you want somebody of color to be representing community of color. Well, here's the thing. In this case, you're talking about a person who not only has been in favor of policies that absolutely is to the detriment of these communities, but she hates these people. It's obvious that she does, that she has to go out and campaign with them. And at the same time, I find that there, and you were just alluding to this, that there are people within those communities that in many cases, and maybe this is just a reflection of capitalism, that they sort of aid and abet this monstrosity of a system by supporting somebody like her. Now, I don't know if it's going to work this time. We're hoping that it doesn't. We'll do our part to try to help. How do you look at a situation like this and how the continued subjugation of communities that are struggling, especially communities of color, and how it's coming from the Democratic side as if to say, because the Democrats are doing it, we don't need to really talk about this. But yet if it was a Republican doing it, you sure as heck know we would be hearing about it until the end of time. Your thoughts?
No, but brother, I think you laid it out with such clarity that you provide the sources of a powerful answer to your powerful question. That there's a double standard here, and white supremacist sensibilities are white supremacist sensibilities. Wherever you find it, you bring critique to bear. I'd say the same thing about patriarchy. I'd say the same thing about homophobia. I'd say the same thing about transphobia. I'd say the same thing about any hatred against the people. Muslims, Arabs, Jews, whoever it is, Italians, Catholics, and so forth, right? These are moral issues. And you would think that someone in the hierarchy of the Democratic Party could have a conversation with Sister Deborah and say, you know exactly what you're doing. Do you know the level of disrespect this sends? Do you know the level of disregard this sends? What is going on? Well, you don't have that because the Democratic Party does not have mechanisms of accountability in place when it comes to certain neoliberal elites like her. Wasn't she head of the Democratic Party committee for a good while?
5 years.
5
You know, what's amazing
years.
is that she was the head of the DNC at the time, and I think it may still be. She was the longest running DNC chair that they've ever had. And if what went down didn't go down, Lord knows how many more years she would have been in that position.
That's exactly right. And that just, it speaks for the worst of a neoliberal ruling class party that is so tied into various kinds of policies that have nothing to do with the empowerment of poor and working people. Nothing whatsoever.
My greatest fear, as I'm sure Jen agrees, I'm sure you do too, that the Democratic Party is going to welcome every last one of the Zionist coalition into their party. If the Republicans are going to continue to move in the direction of a more America First libertarian-esque movement, and by that measure, because if the most loud and prominent voices in this country are the likes of Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens saying that we are doing away with this unholy alliance with Israel, and yet when I look at the Democratic side, you could say Hassan Piker, but Hassan is also fiercely loyal to the Democratic Party. And so once you get away from that, who really is out there saying what needs to be said? Because if you're going to have a break, you have to have a clean break, especially on this. Like if genocide is not a red line, then what is?
Absolutely. Absolutely, though, brother.
Jen?
Are you asking me about my red line? I'm not sure where you're going. My red line was crossed like 20 something years ago when I mean, we're so far past that. I don't even. But, I don't believe in borders and imaginary lines and all of that stuff that you like too. So,
Well, I believe that I believe that culture matters. I do believe that there's many different things that different cultures have to offer. What I always find interesting is if you go to Southern California, especially in LA and San Diego County, people that will complain about Mexicans, and yet they love Mexican culture, their food.
They shouldn't be allowed to have tacos. Anybody who has no tacos for them. Like, that's ridiculous. I can't stand people that crap on that and then they think they're entitled to good Mexican food.
Well, then there was a great meme that I saw online of the difference between going to a white person's barbecue and a black person's barbecue, and they simply showed the difference between the macaroni and cheese.
It is a big difference. That is a big difference.
One side, which is the white side, is like this bland, Kraft mac and cheese. And then on the other side, the black family does like the breadcrumbs and the roasting, and it's gooey and crunchy, and it's delicious.
Yeah.
And and that's why I think food is also one of the great equalizers when it comes to bringing people together. But I just think right now we're reaching a point where I think a lot of those barriers are being broken down because economically it is getting bad, like really bad. And we're also of the mind that, and I was in California recently, gasoline is $6 a gallon there. That's nothing compared to where it's going. It's going to get even worse than that. And so when people are looking around saying, oh, yeah, let's just complain about the culture war now. No, it is the class war. It has always been the class war. And that is the only thing that the people in power care about. You talk about why you don't have enough, make enough money to live. That's when they're going to start doing stuff. That's why, even though we have our disagreements with Ro Khanna, he has been doing a good job. And the fact that Elon Musk feels the need to single him out specifically, like he's like a criminal, I'm like, oh, well, whatever Ro's doing is clearly making an impact, because if you're pissing Elon off, that's when that's when you're doing something right. That's what I see. And your thoughts as we wind down the conversation, where you think things are going in terms of the class solidarity, which is obviously the key to whatever type of rebellion or revolution we have coming.
Well, I'm glad both of you all are accenting these issues of class solidarity. But you can't have class solidarity unless you have persons who have enough courage to cut against the grain of the neoliberal forms of what used to be called identity politics. That doesn't mean that you don't have commitments to Black people and brown people and indigenous people and so forth, but you have a moral and a spiritual vision that takes you beyond simply the neoliberal expressions of those kinds of identities. Uh, I like what Brother Mamdani talked about when he invoked the great Antonio Gramsci. This is very important. You know, now Antonio Gramsci, in the prison notebooks, those notebooks were translated by the father of Pete Buttigieg, Joe Buttigieg, who was my very dear brother. He was from Malta. He was professor at Notre Dame, was one of the founders of Boundary 2, was one of the great left journals along with Social Text and Socialist Review when I was coming along, you know, in the 20s, in my 20s and 30s. And Joseph Buttigieg would always highlight that interregnum, where the old was dying, the new not yet born. It actually goes back partly to Matthew Arnold too, but Gramsci accents that. And in such a moment, there's unpredictability. You just don't know. Yeah. There might be major breaks within the Democratic Party who think seriously of a critique of the corporate duopoly that we're talking about, and then we're in a different moment. We tried to get Bernie to break in 2016 in Philadelphia, right? That's what Chris Hedges and the rest of us were trying to do with Bernie after, you know, I and Nina Turner and others had done over 75 events with our dear brother. But he decided not to. I love the brother. I just disagree. I couldn't see how they were going to treat him with respect. How do you go back to those folk, Bernie? Tell me. Well, he did. Well, he made his own decision and made his way within the Democratic Party. And we get the backlash, the neo-fascist backlash against the failure of neoliberal rule, but with a white supremacist public face. And that's where it becomes very important. You know, it was very important for me to be with Bernie. Why? Because this is one of the few times one of the most progressive communities in the history of the American empire, which is the Black community, did not support the most progressive candidate running for president.
Right.
Well, see, this is a very crucial moment. What's going on, as Marvin Gaye would raise the question? How come we couldn't translate in the way in which we should so that the class solidarity would embrace the most progressive community in the history of the country, which is Black folk who are what? Disproportionately working class, disproportionately poor, but never confining our concerns just to them. I'll start there, but I'll spill over for that class solidarity and even anti-imperial solidarity that cuts in a variety of different ways, I would say. So I just don't know. In the interim, we got a lot of surprises that's going to come our way. We really do. And one crucial variable to keep in mind is the rebellious possibilities of the Black masses. If we had another George Floyd Jr., it's a whole different moment.